unfortunately, on the left, like I was really surprised when a lot of the quote unquote civil war, I don't even like to call it a civil war because it kind of feeds into that narrative, when the Western imperialist offensive really kicked off against Syria in 2013, 2014, I saw a lot of media outlets that consider themselves to be progressive, that consider themselves to be even socialist or anti-imperialist, siding with the Syrian opposition and opposing Assad and uplifting the voices of the quote unquote moderate rebels. I want to play a clip from an interview. This is from 2018. This is right after Trump bombed Syria when he was when he was president still. This is a clip from Democracy Now! With an interview with a Syrian opposition activist. And I just want to get your response to both what the commentator says, but just overall how some sectors of the left or the progressive left have completely missed the mark when it comes to Syria. So let me just play this clip and hear what you have to say.
Rama, let's begin with you. First, respond to the attack that took place this weekend on Syria, U.S., France, and Britain.
Thank you, Amy, for having me on. I think my first reaction when I heard these strikes were happening was, well, what's new? There's been airstrikes against Syria by the Assad regime, by the United States, by Russia, by a whole slew of actors for years now, since 2012, since the people rose up against the brutal regime of Assad and demanding their freedom and dignity. And so it was kind of infuriating to see this being presented as breaking news, this being presented as an apocalypse, that we're about to embark on World War III, especially as has been made clear again and again by the U.S. actions and words is that this was something very limited, just to kind of send a message to Bashar al-Assad that you can go on and kill people with barrel bombs, with anything, but don't limit your use of chemical weapons.
I want to turn to U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. In an interview with Fox News on Sunday, she outlined President Trump's objectives in Syria and said U.S. troops would remain until these objectives are met.
He had three major goals that he wanted to accomplish. He, one, wanted to make sure that chemical weapons were not used, or weapons of mass destruction were not used in any way that could harm American national interest. He wanted to make sure that we defeated ISIS completely and wholly, to make sure that all of that threat was gone, because it is a threat to American national interest. And he wanted to make sure that we had good grounds to watch what Iran was doing, and they weren't making a lot of aggressive headway in terms of that, because Iran is a national threat to American interests. And so I think that, no, he never thought he'd get out in 48 hours. Yes, it is all of our goal to see American troops come home, but we're not going to leave until we know we have accomplished those things.
So, Rama Kudemi, if you can respond to all of that. Again, President Trump having recently said he was pulling U.S. troops out of Syria.
Yeah, and this has been U.S. policy. What Nikki Haley just outlined has really mostly been U.S. policy since under Obama. Nothing much has changed under Trump in terms of the United States has proclaimed that, oh, it wants to see and support the Syrian people's revolution, that it wants to see freedom and democracy in Syria, but in fact has really intervened in ways that have strengthened the regime. So its primary goal, the defeat of ISIS, i.e. the war on terror, is really what's brought the U.S. into Syria very forcefully. When they started bombing Syria in September 2014, it was against ISIS, and that's been the limit. That's really been where they focus most their energy. Once in a while, as Trump did last year, as in Trump did this year, they'll bomb a regime target, really an empty airfield, an empty chemical weapons factory, and then say, see, we want Assad gone. And yet again and again, their actions have proven that, in fact, they want regime preservation. This is not something, they are not really concerned with the Syrian people's demands for the fall of regime. They're concerned with continuing the war on terror, which has been the operation of the United States since 2001, and ensuring that we are constantly bombing quote-unquote terrorists, when in reality what the United States is doing, alongside with Russia, alongside with the regime, alongside with Iran in Syria, is the fact that everyone claims that they are fighting terrorists, and what gets lost are Syrian people's lives and dreams to live in a free and democratic Syria.
So a lot to unpack there. Again, something that so many false narratives, and I think, like you said, Dan, I think they're like the way they do it is that they put some elements of truth, but then they mix in things that are clearly false and clearly a psyop designed to oppose Assad. Obviously, this is somebody who opposes the democratically elected President Assad, calls his government a regime. The vibe that I got from what she was saying was that she was upset that the U.S. was leaving. She wants permanent U.S. presence and war and destabilization in Syria. And this is supposedly from the left. This is supposedly from people who are progressive, from people who are left of center. What are your thoughts, first of all, on this clip and what the guest was saying, but also just on how the left has missed the mark when it comes to Syria?
Yeah, well, the left also missed the mark in terms of Libya. A lot of the left supported the invasion of Libya, including Amy Goodman. She's also been awful on Nicaragua, been very supportive of regime change operations there. She used to be good. She used to have the War and Peace report and used to care about war and peace and want peace and against war. Now she has the quarantine report. And now she pretty much she doesn't see any imperialist wars she doesn't like.
Right.
And that's true with most of the liberals and left in the US.
Right.
And there's kind of a switch there because, ironically, Trump at least made noise about getting out of Syria, made noise about getting out of Afghanistan. And every time he did, it was liberals and people on the left who criticized him, like that woman who was being interviewed by Amy Goodman, criticized him for not intervening more, for not bombing more. And that is the left position at this point, or the so-called left or the fake left. Right. But sadly, most of the left in the U.S. is the fake left. And then it's very interesting. You have this commentator who's interviewed. She's obviously in Washington, D.C., right? She speaks perfect English without accent.
Right.
I mean, if there is an accent, she's probably from New Jersey.
Right.
So, like, you can't find even someone who lives in Syria to talk to you. And again, this woman's beef is that we didn't start World War III there. She wanted that. Like, what kind of person wants that for their own country? Well, she doesn't care. She doesn't live there. Maybe she never lived there. I don't even know. But she doesn't sound like she was ever from there. So it's very troubling. And what she doesn't say, of course, is the truth, is that not only was the U.S., she claims, they were focused on fighting terrorism. In fact, they were supporting it. They were supporting ISIS. We know this. And again, there's many people who have admitted this, like Joe Biden himself. Trump, to his credit, said this during his campaign, that the U.S. had actually helped create ISIS, which is true. So it was worse than even she was saying. But again, her recipe was more bombing and more intervention in her country. And she tries to conflate what Russia and Iran were doing with what the U.S. was doing. Russia and Iran were invited by the sovereign government of Syria to be there. Okay, that means they were there legally, and the U.S., which was not invited, and which the Security Council did not invite to there, was not there legally. Okay, so those are not the same things. And frankly, Russia and Iran did help defeat the terrorists in Syria, and I saw the impact of that. And that is that you have outside the areas that are being occupied by foreign powers, like the U.S. and Turkey, Syria is now at peace. And you can drive freely throughout the country. We did that with very few checkpoints. There is very little military presence. You have a country that's at peace, that is allowed to freely exercise their religions. So that's the result of Assad winning. And that is what the West does not want to admit. Okay, why isn't Assad still killing his people, right?
Yeah.
Because it was never about that. Why are the religions now, being practiced freely? Why aren't they being clamped down on? Because that was never the point. That was the point of the other people that the U.S. and other countries were backing. So I think now, with hindsight, we see who the real bad guys were. And it wasn't the Syrian military. It was these foreign terrorists.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think it's something that we have to really keep in mind, because the left, in the quote unquote left in the United States, has been supporting regime change against Syria for many years, especially what I call the champagne socialist, or the bougie left, the left that gets a lot of NGO money, that gets a lot of support from these foreign oil companies that have a vested interest in Syria. And like you said, it doesn't even make sense. Why would Assad just randomly wake up one day and be like, hey, I'm going to kill my own and gas my own people, and just for no reason do that? It just, logically, it doesn't even make sense. And it's really a shame, just like you said with Libya as well, that so many people on the quote unquote US left just completely failed to understand the real class nature of what was going on. That Gaddafi wasn't this horrible guy who was killing his own people, that Assad isn't this horrible guy killing his own people. And I feel like this all falls in line with the new strategy of US imperialism, taking notes from Gene Sharp and taking notes from the Color Revolutions and Zbigniew Brzezinski and all these people who are attacking the left from the left, who are making imperialist-backed regime change operations seem like these progressive, democratic grassroots uprisings against a dictator. We see them doing the same thing against President Ortega in Nicaragua, against President Maduro in Venezuela, against President Assad, Gaddafi. And I feel like this is all very recent. I mean, obviously, they have tried different iterations of this over time, but this is something that they've been doing, especially with the quote unquote Arab Spring and social media.